will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via YouTube, Stitcher and the Apple Podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swadling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Mike, are you still with us?
I am indeed, just about.
Excellent. Good to hear in all the circumstances. So, Mike, what have we got to discuss today?
Of course, the continuing lockdown and COVID-19, the Taxpayers Alliance Town Hall Rich List, which has come out recently, our fantastic interview with David Kurten, the Brexit Alliance GLA member and a prospective independent candidate for London Mayor, and what to do to stay busy.
Yes, excellent. So first up, of course, what everybody's trying not to talk about, but sadly having to, the ongoing COVID-19 lockdown. We're now almost a month into the lockdown. So the question is the lockdown working and what is the exit strategy? It looks to me, I don't know what you think, Mike, but it looks to me as if the number of deaths is sort of plateauing. Which means as I understand it, that we've reached the flattening of the curve. We've reached that peak. But whether that's the case, time will tell. But the government has decided to issue 5 criteria that need to be met before the lockdown can be eased, if not removed entirely. Some of them seem a bit, sensible. Some of them are. I'm not so sure what the metrics will be for them. One of them is the NHS can cope across the UK. Well, as far as we understand it, there's excess capacity at the moment, especially in the Nightingale Hospital. So touch wood, if we've reached the first peak, if you like, then that seems to be met already. A sustained fall in daily death rates. Well, as I say, we're at that peak, so maybe in a week we'll be sort of there or thereabouts on that. The rate of infection decreasing. Not quite sure how they're going to do that without having measured lots of people in the past by testing lots of people, which they haven't tested that many people. So not quite sure how that will be demonstrated empirically, other than the fact that there's not many people going into hospital. So the infection rate must have decreased, and logically, if people aren't meeting people, that's likely to be the case. But the last two, Mike, I don't know what you think about these, because I'm not quite sure how they're going to measure these. Supply of testing and PPE able to meet demand. And finally, no risk of a second peak. Mike, how are you finding the lockdown and what do you think of these exit criteria?
The lockdown was remarkably better until the government issued what I consider a remarkably dumb set of exit criteria. I sort of was hoping the government would start seeing the way forward and talk about how we get out. I had assumed at that point that they would be competent in what they were doing. And when the government, I wouldn't want to be normally that critical, and I certainly wasn't a few weeks ago. They're under immense pressure. These individuals are working ridiculously hard. We've seen what the sacrifice that Boris has made himself. But when you take away all of my freedoms and then you issue criteria like this, I really am alarmed, to say the least. You mentioned it there, the rate of infection decreasing. You need a steady state to test infection from the past to the future to know that it's going. You need to be testing at the same numbers. You need to be testing the same sorts of people. It needs to have the same randomness. I have no sense that they've been able to do that. It needs to be using the same test. I don't think they're doing that. I don't think they're likely to do that. And that's a very subjective idea. Supply of testing and PPE able to meet demand. Well, the demand for testing, presumably, is everyone in the country. I thought the PPE was already meeting demand, but depends. You need some criteria around that, exactly as you've said, and obviously you need to have some idea of what the future demand is. But the really concerning one to me is the no risk of a second peak. Now, I'm no biologist or whatever these people that look into these things are, but my understanding is there is never no risk of a second peak. At the point we all meet up, at the point more people are out there, at the point at any point we don't have some sort of herd immunity, to use the unfashionable term, there is always a risk of a second peak. The government in that line, to me, have said we should stay in lockdown forever. Now, I don't think they meant that. I think they're sloppy. But again, when you've locked us down, you don't get to be sloppy. That came out on the same day that one of the government ministers, and I can't remember who it was, had come out and said we need to stay here until there's a vaccine. Well, very few people are thinking about a vaccine in less than sort of 18 months. Is that really what they're saying? Or was it sloppy again? Not good enough.
No, and what sort of a peak are they concerned about? A second peak just means, well, okay, we stay in lockdown for a couple of more weeks, then we gradually are released from lockdown, and then maybe in the autumn, when the normal, if you like, flu season comes around, there's a second peak. That peak may be nowhere near as high as the first peak, but it's still a second peak. So, it's just it doesn't have any metrics around it, and as you say, it's very sloppy. And in theory, if you were to take a very risk-averse attitude towards those criteria, we're going to be here forever. So yeah, I'm quite concerned about those criteria. But I think one thing I've heard people discuss is that maybe we're going to be in lockdown for the next couple of weeks whilst Boris Johnson is recuperating, and hopefully when he's back to full health and back in charge, he'll actually look to start to remove the lockdown provisions, assuming that the peak has subsided, which I think must surely happen by then, and possibly because the current people effectively running the government are too risk averse to make that decision at this juncture. But time will tell. I certainly hope that we're not going to be in this current situation for many more weeks, because of the damage that it's doing to the economy, and just the thorough miserableness of it, really, because you probably are saving some lives, but how many lives are you damaging for the longer term by reducing the economic output by so much?
There's no absolutes in this, is there? It's all trade-offs. Life is all trade-offs. You save a life through people not mixing, but you take a life through someone whose pain and misery means that they're suffering, or they're not getting their cancer treatment or their cancer screening. They're not undertaking the economic activity that will allow them to live more years, because there's a massive correlation between wealth and someone might say more than correlation, a causation between wealth and life and life expectancy. It's not clear. Everything's a bad choice. It's about making the least bad choice. It's not clear to me that they're doing that anymore. And as you say, maybe it does need Boris in the room to help drive them towards it. You mentioned about the miserableness. I do want to say there wasn't all miserableness this week, though. The police had a jolly good time on Thursday night, from what I could see, out on Westminster Bridge, and indeed in a hospital in Bradford, in great numbers, having a bit of a party. Not setting the right example, were they, Dan?
No, it's no example for them to be setting, and certainly not at a time when they are harassing people who happen to be sat on benches in parks. One rule for them, one rule for the rest of us, sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know. Was it a photo opportunity or something? It just didn't make any sense. And as you say, it's no example to be setting when they expect us to be all staying indoors. But we have been staying indoors. However, However, we did meet up for our virtual drinks on Wednesday, the 15th of April. A lot of merry people joined us from the our GoToMeeting, the GoToMeeting app. Mike, how did you find it?
I've been doing a few of these of various different types with friends and family, and really enjoyable. Good to chew over and chat with old friends. Emphasis on the old. It was good. It was good fun. And I hope, having heard from a couple of people that were there on the night, who have come back to me since, I think they pretty much enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, no, a good night was had by all, and we're going to look to put on a further event, especially as if we're going to be in lockdown for a few more weeks. It'll be wrong not to have another catch up, and everybody's welcome to that. Moving on from COVID, thank God. The Taxpayers Alliance have recently issued the annual Town Hall Rich List, where they set out the number of people earning extravagant salaries whilst working for local authorities. A highlight, if you like, from Croydon is that there are now 23 people working for Croydon Council who earned over £100,000 last year, and 3 who earned more than the Prime Minister. This is up from the 19 people who earned over £100,000 the previous year. Shocking stuff when I can't get my bins emptied. Mike, you've put a piece up on the website with some more lowlights. Would you like to highlight some of those lowlights for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've said there, lots of good stuff from the Taxpayers Alliance has come out. You look at various councils. Croydon Council has those 23 people. Barnet, which is a similar size, has just 7. Some of our neighbours like Merton has 9, Sutton 11, Tandridge just 1, earning over 100k. So have a look at the article. There's some more details there. We also list out who the people in Croydon are that earn these vast sums of money. We've gone beyond that though. Croydon Council, like all councils, are legally obliged to publish spend over £500. So and we have they put that out. We've done some analysis and we've looked at the calendar year 2019 and all the spend over £500 for various things. Some interesting items there. Brick by Brick overheads and admin cost centre had consultancy fees of over 105,000. Over 330,000 was dished out by local councillors in amounts over 500. So the total could be even higher than that in their community ward budgets. Now, there's lots of good things that they spent that money on. But when you look down the list and you start to wonder whether we actually pay our huge council tax to go to the Sandersteads Residents Association, to go to the Pinewood Scout Centre, just there's a few others on here. South Croydon Business Association, probably very good causes, but is that the kind of critical service we pay out for? Have a look down the list, see what you think. But the piece de resistance is the Cultural Growth Fund that Croydon Council pays to encourage culture in the town. This is the fund that a few years ago paid, was it 10 grand for someone to defecate on stage? Once again, predominantly paid for by that. The Croydon Pride event managed to pay out £59,000 for a one-day event subsidised by the taxpayer, and I want to thank you all for subsidising my day out, but I don't really think you should be forced to. Another 160,000 went to Box Park, another 5,000 for a very expensive round at the Oval Tavern. Have a look, some shocking figures. I do want to say, and it may sound like we're bashing the Labour Council here, and we are, but I want to be an equal opportunity basher here. The Conservative opposition voted for the last couple of budgets. They are just as responsible for these figures as Labour are. It is worrying that our councillors, both red and blue, don't seem to take responsibility for our money.
Indeed. I was having a look at the the full rich list that's been provided by the Taxpayers Alliance. And as you can imagine, some of the larger salaries paid to council employees across the country are for the chief executives of some of the very large authorities, so such as Birmingham and such, where they do actually have quite a lot of responsibility. But the biggest salary paid to a council employee in the United Kingdom is both astronomical and very surprising as to where you would find this employee. The biggest package is for the North Lanarkshire Chief Officer for Health and Social Care, who is paid over £615,000 a year.
That's just extraordinary, isn't it? So what's that? 4 times the Prime Minister's salary, something of that order of magnitude?
Yeah, and that's North Lanarkshire.
Are you suggesting the cost of living and the average salary in the area are not necessary? He's buying a whole town at a time, actually, isn't he? That sort of salary.
That is astonishing. So things perhaps not all. Well, I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe things are rosy north of the border if they're paying that sort of money to people. But yeah, no, we've got an article on our website, well worth a read and well worth looking at the full list as provided by the Taxpayers Alliance, an organisation who we've worked with in the past and certainly will look to work with in the future, especially when the pandemic is over. We'll hopefully have them back down in Croydon.
Just say one last thing very briefly on this. The council tax is a not terribly progressive tax. Yes, people in mansions will tend to be richer than people in flats, but that's not always true. The rateable value of your house and your income and your ability to pay are simply not always that well correlated. This is a tax, and these spending comes from that tax that often hits the large families the hardest and the most regressively. And your local neighbourhood council is not spending that money wisely, and that really should be a shock for all of us, and we really should be pitching to them to take a little bit more care with the work we put in to generate the funds that they get to spend.
No question. Well, talking of councils, as it were, we of course in Croydon we've got Croydon Council, but we also have the Greater London Assembly, as it were, and we are governed to a certain extent by Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, and we recently interviewed David Kurten, the Brexit Alliance GLA member, who is looking to run for the mayoralty next year now, following the cancellation of the elections or the postponement of the elections until 2021, and also looking to, if not become the mayor, to retain his seat as a GLA member, standing as an independent now in May 2021. So we'll just go now to the interview that we recorded with him earlier in the past week.
We're joined today by David Kurten, the GLA member of the Brexit Alliance grouping in the GLA. David, thanks again for joining us. Just a few questions, see what's going on at the moment. So the news is changing all the time on COVID-19 and what's going on. I saw you've posted a few items on YouTube and written some articles. What broadly are your thoughts on what's happening at the moment?
Yeah, well, this COVID-19 or Wuhan virus, whatever you like to call it, it's all anyone's talking about at the moment. It just seems like there's no other news really going on at all. I mean, there are other things going on, but this is what's occupying everyone's minds. I've got various thoughts about it, because back in January, February, it was obvious that there was something going on in China, in Wuhan particularly, that was pretty serious. And you could see that it was going to spread out around the world, because, this is how the world is today with international travel. So we needed to prepare at that time, because what was going on in China in January was obviously going to happen here in March and April, and here we are now in March and April, and it's here in the UK in the West. But what was happening in the mainstream media here back in January and February is that they were talking it down completely, minimizing it and saying, look, nothing to see here, it's not going to be any more serious than the flu, and it's not contagious, and saying all these kind of things which you could see were completely untrue. But then around sometime around the beginning of March the 4th, 5th, 6th, not sure exactly which day, there was a complete flip. And they went from one extreme of minimizing everything to completely the other extreme. And they started catastrophizing. And at that point, you had Boris, starting his weekly press conferences at first, and then daily press conferences to try to explain what was going on and what the government was doing. And initially, I thought their response was quite sensible. They were like, well, this is something serious is happening. We need to try to stop people from dying, minimize deaths from this pandemic as much as possible, but at the same time try to keep life going on. But the mainstream media wouldn't let that lie, and they were agitating, I think, for first of all to close down sporting events, and then to close down pubs, then to close down the schools, close down the gyms, and even some of them are now, trying to get parks closed down and so on, just shut everything. But of course, the damage to our civil liberties is immense, and I really don't think that the government, the mainstream media, the people who have been calling for this and have reacted to it in this way really understand the immense damage they've done to the fabric of society and our communities around the country, and also the damage to business is absolutely immense. We're going to start seeing small and medium-sized businesses just run out of and go to the wall, and I really don't think that they've thought about this and the consequences of what they've done. I mean, look, this is serious. Clearly this is serious. But this is not Ebola, where 70% of people who get it die. This is not the Spanish flu, which killed 20 million people around the world. That was 100 years ago when there were far less people in the world. So it's not something that I think that needs the drastic authoritarian response the government has put in place, and that's been driven through fear of the media, I think. And so it looks like they've had far more of a media strategy in terms of appeasing the media and not getting the media people off their backs, rather than a health strategy which would have been something that could have dealt with this as best as possible, but without damaging our economy and our civil liberties. So those are my thoughts, really. There's a lot to say, and I'm sure everybody is thinking about this and just trying to work out what's going on. So everybody's got lots and lots of different thoughts, and everybody's got different opinions. But that's pretty much a summary of what I think about the situation at the moment.
No, so thanks for that. And it's interesting, isn't it? The different countries have got different strategies, but the actual, with one or two outliers, South Korea and Taiwan, death rates seem to be tragically very similar. And it's not clear that the shutting down of our economy has actually made the difference it was meant to make. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a worry. Just on the economic front, any thoughts on what we might need to do, or what some simple things government could do to change things to get us out of the slump once we're hopefully back up and running?
Well, the longer you go on, the more difficult it's going to be because the more damage will be done to more and more businesses. You're getting to the point, as I said, where the most vulnerable businesses who have got, not much cash in reserve are going to run out of cash, so they won't be able to pay their workers, they won't be able to pay their bills, and the government's offered some kind of support. There's £300 billion in loans and loan guarantees there, but it's a process to go through and get them, and you've got to prove things and so on. So it's going to be difficult for a lot of businesses. So, I think up to now, people have coped with it as best they can. But if this goes on another 2 or 3 weeks, beyond another 2 or 3 weeks, if this goes on for another 2 or 3 months rather than 2 or 3 weeks, there's going to be immense damage done to the backbone of the economy, and that's something that's going to take years to get out of, and could end up doing more damage in the long term than will be done in the short term. And I think President Trump summed it up very well when he said the cure must not be worse than the disease. Yeah, the disease is bad, of course it is, but the way they're presenting statistics here in terms of deaths is the wrong way, I think. They're doing this daily count of deaths in the UK. So it's about, 700, 800, 1,000 people dying per day with the coronavirus. But you've got to distinguish dying with the virus from dying of the virus. And the way to count the people who have died of the virus is to look at the difference between the number of deaths in a particular day or a particular week compared to the 5-year average, which you can find on the Office for National Statistics website. And that takes a bit of time to come in. But that shows for the first 3 weeks of March, there was no difference. There were no extra deaths above the 5-year average. For the final week of March, there were 500 extra deaths over the 5-year average, and there will maybe be more, in the first week of April, maybe 1,000 or 2,000. But this is not the thousands figure that they're talking about. So the actual number of people who've died of the virus is much less than those who've died with the virus. But the question is the long-term damage to the economy actually going to cause more people to die in the long term than lives you might save in the short term? It's very difficult to know the answer to that until it's happened, because you can only answer by modeling, and mathematical modeling has its own problems. But the longer this goes on, the more bankruptcies will be, the more hardship there will be. That means the more stress there will be, the lower people's quality of life will be, and people will slip into relative poverty, if not absolute poverty. So we've got to get things moving again as quickly as possible. And I'm sorry, giving a long answer here. If I can go on to something you alluded to when you spoke just a moment ago, absolutely. Because you've got, as you mentioned quite rightly, different countries have got different approaches to this, and we've gone into what you might call a shutdown. It's not really a full lockdown. I mean, France has gone like full authoritarian. It's gone really, crazy. I mean, in France, you have to have written permission from an official just to leave your flat. You're not even allowed to go out for exercise. So that's really harsh. I mean, I don't know how anyone could live with that and cope with that, to be honest. At least in this country, in the UK, you're allowed to go out for exercise. You're allowed to go out to the shop. You're allowed to go to work if you can't work from home. But you've got countries like Sweden who have not done any kind of lockdown or shutdown at all. And they've just said, well, we're going to carry on life like normal. And they're doing what the UK was going to do at first, which was to try to build up what they call herd immunity. Now, the thing about mentioning herd immunity, it sounds terrible. I mean, it's just a phrase that left the government open to all kinds of attack and accusations of being insensitive and callous and everything. But that's what Sweden has essentially done. It's also what Brazil's done, is what Japan's done, it's what Belarus is doing, a smaller country. Belarus is still allowing football matches to go on and be played. They had football matches yesterday and Easter Sunday. But these countries, Sweden, Japan, Brazil, Belarus, have had no worse effects. I mean, the pandemic has not hit them any worse than it's hit Italy, Spain, the UK, and the USA. In fact, for Japan, the death rate is far lower. So you cannot say. Or you can probably say that this is evidence that locking down the country and shutting down the country has had no real effect in comparison to countries that haven't done a lockdown or a shutdown. So, I said this morning, I put out something on social media, just a question: is the lockdown the right strategy? Because if you look at Sweden, Brazil, Japan, they're not doing any worse than we are. So, you question whether that was the right strategy after all. But of course, hindsight is perfect. But now we do have some hindsight. The question is, well, we got to look at this and get out of this as quickly as possible. And I think, what I would counsel is to look at these countries and to look and just see and look and understand that this hasn't worked. We haven't reduced the case rate, the death rate, any more than in Sweden and Brazil. And so really the damage you're doing to the economy, the damage you're doing to civil liberties and the fabric of society is so great that, let's just get out of this lockdown, shutdown now and, do what they're doing in Sweden and Japan and Brazil. I mean, that's what I would suggest myself.
Absolutely. No, thanks for that. So let's move on to something hopefully a bit happier. You've been a GLA member for the last 4 years. Any thoughts on Mayor Khan or any of the other GLA members you would like care to share with us?
I think you probably know my thoughts on Mayor Khan. Sadiq Khan and Sadiq Khan's public profile, and I think that's really the extent of it. Look, I don't dislike him, to be honest. I mean, I think over 4 years I've got used to him, and it's actually it's quite entertaining to go in and spar with him in the London Assembly, because the kind of things he out with in defense of his political positions, I just find just absolutely ridiculous, because he is one of these woke, progressive, virtue signaling leftists, liberal metropolitan leftists, who are just completely out of touch with normal people outside their own little media, political, liberal, progressive bubble. And he lives in that with most of the other members of the London Assembly. Not all of them, but most of them are in that same kind of groupthink progressive bubble, and they just spout nonsense continually. And it's just, I mean, I just find it so ridiculous that in a way it's just hard to dislike, because talking rubbish all the time. And I go in there and I just go in there with my normal common sense as which you would have, and everyone listening to this would have, and most people in the country would have, and you listen to Sadiq Khan and some of the people and what they say, and you just think, where on earth are you from? What on earth has got into your heads that you come out with this nonsense all the time? And so it blows my mind in a way that he won the mayoral election in 2016. And it's just it was a very bizarre election because in 2015 when the campaign started for it, you had Sadiq Khan and Zach Goldsmith. And Zach Goldsmith, the Tory candidate, was in the lead. He was expected to win 6 months before the election took place. But as the campaign went on, I mean, he was advised to attack Sadiq Khan, over his links to people like Louis Farrakhan and so on. He represented this guy who was the leader of the Nation of Islam and so on. And he's talk about his connections to all these unsavory characters and so on. But the more he did that, the more Sadiq Khan's popularity grew because he was able to paint himself as a victim and he painted Zach Goldsmith as this nasty, hateful bigot. So he's not. I mean, Zach Goldsmith he's got more money than sense. Obviously, he's in a world of his own. But he's a nice chap. I know him, and he's a decent guy. But he was able to. Sadiq Khan was able to paint him as a nasty person, and of course the London media was right on his side, and it ended up with him winning by a large margin. And you got the elections were due this year. I mean, they were due next month in May. Obviously, they've been postponed for a year until May 2021. But again, he's expected to win by a landslide. The polling shows him on 55%. His nearest next candidate, Sean Bailey, the Conservative guy, is on low 20s. So unless there's a big change, Sadiq Khan's going to win again. I hope there is, because they say a week is a long time in politics. So hopefully a year is a long time in politics, and I'm going to stand for the mayor election and also for the assembly elections, and so I hope my profile will increase over the year, and I'll be able to get something of a challenge together to Sadiq Khan. So we'll see how things go, and hopefully use this long time to change things around.
Well, we're on that. So we interviewed you a little while back, and you quoted in that people will have a choice to vote for someone who's pro-Brexit, pro-Trump, and anti-woke if they want to. Now, that's a pretty brave statement for London. It works brilliantly for us. We love that. But how do you find that sort of message works across the capital more generally?
Well, there's some people that will vote for these progressive parties, whatever. So, whatever I say, they're not going to vote for me. Whatever Sean Bailey would say, he's considered to be on the right. He's, a little bit sort of politically correct in some areas. But, I've known Sean for a long time. He's a great guy. I like him. He's a friend of mine. I wouldn't agree with him on everything, but he's a good guy. But, I think the sort of liberal progressives that have been brainwashed in universities, and then they've done gender studies, or they've done history or media studies or whatever, and then get a job. I mean, they're never going to vote for anybody but someone on the mid to far left. So I hope that I'll be able to reach them and convince them that there's a better way of running a society than in sort of illiberal. The liberals are very illiberal, but there's a better way than this illiberal, progressive, cultural Marxist direction that's going in London. But there's an awful lot of people who don't agree with that. Let's think about the referendum. A long time ago now. To 4 years. The referendum of May 2016, 40% of London voted to leave the European Union, which is far more than was expected. So, that's actually, I think, about 1.5 million people voted to leave the European Union, which is actually more than the number of people who voted for Sadiq Khan, only 1.2 or 1.3 million, because obviously the turnout was higher in the referendum. So, if we could just get the people who are pro-Brexit to come out and vote in their numbers, then we can move Sadiq Khan out to pasture. And, I'm unashamedly pro-Trump. No, I don't agree with him on absolutely everything, but I think, he is a breath of fresh air to the whole world of politics, the politics of the whole globe, because he's smashing up this kind of liberal, illiberal, progressive, leftist, suffocating, politically correct ideology and paradigms that have just kind of wrapped up the whole world in knots, and he's done that in the United States. You've got Viktor Orban doing that in Hungary, Salvini in Italy. You've got the whole Brexit movement in the UK, which is bigger than any one person, and with that goes the what I say is being anti-woke, because people are just absolutely fed up of this mind-blowingly insane political correctness, and people just want an end to it. And I think there's a lot of people in London who are never going to go on to the mainstream media. They're never going to be interviewed by the Evening Standard or the BBC, because they choose the people they put on in front of the screen or on the newspaper pages very, very carefully. But there's huge numbers of people in London, as there are in other countries, who just find this woke, politically correct stuff absolutely barking mad, and would happily vote for someone if they just knew that there was someone there that stood for those things. And so I don't think it's a risk saying that I'm pro-Brexit, pro-Trump and anti-woke, because there is a big slice of the electorate who want to vote for someone like that, and there isn't anyone else there apart from me who will represent those people. And I want to carry on in that political space. Otherwise, there won't be anyone. Who are people going to vote for if there is no one who's pro-Brexit, pro-Trump, anti-woke? I mean, there is no one else.
No, I think you're right. You'll be. I'm certainly not aware of anyone else that's running on those sort of messages. So one of the areas you're looking to focus on as mayor, and what's your campaign going to kind of be focused around?
Well, the two big things in London that the mayor is in charge of is transport and police and crime. And the police and crime is the one thing I think that people were most concerned about now this coronavirus, which has taken over. But the London crime figures were going through the roof. Violent crime was spiraling out of control. But at the same time as this was happening, you've got the police being directed to focus on politically correct nonsense. Let's patrol people's hate crimes and tweets on the internet, rather than getting the police out in the front line on the streets to find criminals and lock them up. That's the job of the police. The job of the police is to find the bad guys and protect the good guys. But you've got this whole kind of thinking which has become endemic, throughout the police and many other professions and institutions as well, that blurs up good and bad. And instead of thinking of, people who do bad stuff as the baddies, they think of people with victim characteristics as always good, and people with the oppressive characteristics as generally being bad. And this is, I talk a lot about cultural Marxism, and this is the kind of cultural Marxist thinking that pervades a lot of the police force and the civil service behind the scenes and educational establishment and so on, is that white people are inherently oppressors, so they're bad by virtue of their skin color. Black people, ethnic minority people are oppressed, victims of society, and so if they do something wrong, it's not really their fault, it's society's fault that's oppressed them, and therefore we need to treat them with a light touch, and they don't get treated equally before the law. Now, I'm completely against that way of thinking. We treat every person as an individual. You are equal before the law. I'm not going to give you leniency because of your characteristics which are written in the Equality Act. I will treat you based on what you do. If you join a gang and if you're carrying a knife, it doesn't matter whether you're black or white or male or female or young or old, you'll be treated in the same way. We'll take that knife off you and we'll stick you in a cell and we will throw the book at you. And that's what the police have got to do. And they've got to stop acting on the basis of treating people differently depending on the characteristics that they have, and letting people off because they're because of whatever is in their minds.
So similar sort of thing. We've spoken with you, and you've spoken for us about free speech before, and how sort of common sense things that were once and now seem to be controversial, and the infringement of hate speech laws, particularly around Christianity. How do you think that battle for maintaining our freedom's going?
It's very tough, and freedom is being eroded every year, every month, almost every week. Something happens to erode our freedom of speech, and often what's happening is that the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, are going beyond what the law says and arresting people for things which are not crimes, but then they get written into the statistics as non-crime hate incidents. And this is something that I'd never really heard of until a few years ago, that there's 120,000 non-crime hate incidents every year where the police have arrested somebody or written up that there possibly is an offence here, but they found out it wasn't an offence, but it stays written down in the criminal records, and possibly some people it might show up for them on a criminal record check, and these can be things like this guy Harry Miller, who was chased down by Humberside police for writing a limerick about transgenderism. In these days it's seems to be don't have the right opinion, and the right political opinion is that there are 100 genders, and if you say you're a woman, you're a man, but you say you're a woman, then you are a woman. Well, this is patent nonsense. You're not. I mean, if you're a man, you're a man. You can't become a woman. If you're a woman, you can't become a man. You still got female chromosomes and female genitalia. I mean, no one can, change that. But the politically correct view, this is Orwellian, is like you have to accept that unreality is reality, and if you don't, then you're going to be hunted down, harassed, and possibly charged, and possibly lose your job. I've known people in the teaching profession who've lost their job for this. They win on appeal, going through the employment tribunals, but that's a long and costly process, and not everyone can do that. So, we're losing our freedoms just to speak of reality as reality. It's absolutely mad. And, we've got to turn back. Otherwise, we're going to lose our collective minds, honestly. And so this is where freedom of speech, just to say, that things are as they are, is being lost. We're really almost at the end of this, and unless we turn back to something more sane, I really, worry about what's going to happen to the country in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. And you mentioned the teaching profession there. I'm a school governor at a few different schools, and different places have different ethoses. You're also the former UKIP spokesman on education. So more broadly, what do you think works well and what doesn't work so well in education in the UK today?
It's changed so much since I was a teacher. I mean, even the last time I was a teacher, actually, I was, I taught right up to when I was elected in 2016. But I most of my teaching in the UK, sort of in the decade of the 2000s, the 1990s and 2000s. I mean, in the first half of this decade, I spent more time abroad. I taught in the USA and Bosnia and Bermuda, which is nice, to use the job to go traveling. But when I started, it was fun. I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but back in the 1990s, you could take your sixth formers to the pub, and I wouldn't buy them any alcohol, but you could sit in the pub and have a chat with them, and tell some jokes. You wouldn't even dream of doing that now, because people will be all over you saying this is irresponsible, this is child abuse, blah blah blah. These things were different, and there's more and more rules and regulations and political correctness coming in, and some of even the content of subjects has been changed to move away from fact-based education to things that are just to do with this kind of social justice woke culture. That's actually being embedded in the curriculum, if you like. And if I went to a school today, I probably wouldn't recognize it. I wonder if I'd last 5 minutes, to be honest, with my facts and my I'd be accused of being some kind of dinosaur. But I mean, I think we got to go back to traditional education where we value excellence. Britain was always an incredibly successful country because we valued excellence, we valued self-sufficiency, we trained kids to think for themselves, to be resilient, to work things out for themselves, and we taught them how to think. But it seems it's just gone so far the other way that children aren't taught how to think for themselves and to solve problems and work things out. They're like fed a kind of diet of, politically correct ideology. Science and geography are totally been, this whole climate catastrophism has been embedded in geography and science, and it's part of it now. It never was before. You can't question that in schools without someone sort of questioning your fitness to teach, even though it is very questionable, and so on. So I think there's got to be a massive turning back towards traditional style education, and also at the university level. Let's just send people to university for whom it works. Like, the 15-20% of people who are very academic, who would benefit from university education, yes, let's get them to university. Sending 50% of people to university when the vast majority of them don't benefit from it, they don't get any financial advantage from it. In fact, they get an albatross of debt hung around their neck, and they just learn a lot of things which should not have no value to them whatsoever. Let's just get them out working at the age of 18. So they would gain more benefit from working in a shop for 3 years than sitting in a classroom learning about gender studies, honestly. So, let's bring this kind of common sense to education. It would really annoy everybody in the education establishment, but this is what we need to do to become self-sufficient and self-reliant and self-resilient again. We've got to train all the individuals in the country to be that way, and then we can be like that as a nation again, and we can thrive again. And I think that really this is what's fundamentally needed.
Absolutely, yeah. As someone that started work at 16, frankly, I learned more in that first 6 months than I learned the last couple of years at school. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
But okay, so bit of other news this past week. Labour have appointed a all Remain shadow cabinet. We're moving through the transition period. How do you think that might pan out for Labour, and what are the threats you see for Brexit?
They're going to start Ramoning again, and they can't help themselves. They really can't help themselves. At the moment, everyone is preoccupied with the coronavirus, but this is going to be over in 2 or 3 months. I think by September, at the latest, we'll be back to normal. Then we'll be coming up to December the 31st, which is really the real Brexit. What happened on January the 31st, it was symbolic, but it wasn't really Brexit. But December the 31st is when we're really going to leave most of the institutions and the single market and the customs union. The Labour cabinet wants to stop it. I mean, in a way, fair play to Keir Starmer. He's jumped one way. Jeremy Corbyn was sitting on the fence. He himself, I think, wanted to leave, but he knew the majority of his party wanted to remain. And so he just sat on the fence for 3 years, and that paralysed the party. And they did very badly because no one knew, what exactly did this stand for. But, at least if Keir Starmer comes out and says, I'm for Remain, we are now a rejoin party, we want to rejoin, we want to delay and rejoin. I think that's what they're going to try and do, because these people aren't going to give up. Yes, the election victory for Boris last December was a victory for Brexit. People voted for Boris because they wanted Brexit more than they were voting for Boris. The country just wants to get on with it. But I think Labour, are going to try to mop up the Lib Dem votes and so on, because the Lib Dems are in chaos. They haven't got a leader, and they're not they're not even going to elect a leader until a year's time. So, I think trying to keep the two bits of Labour together, the sort of working class in the north and the Midlands and South Wales who want to leave the EU, and all the liberal lovies who are globalists and want, they want to, essentially they hate the idea of Britain. They hate the idea of the nation state. They want to get rid of nations. They want everyone to join up in a EU super state, and then that'll all be part of the United Nations and so on. The two sides are irreconcilable. To be honest, the best thing for them to do is to split, and then people can just be themselves. You have Keir Starmer be Remoaners, rejoiners. I don't think they're going to have much electoral success with that. But, I really don't see how the two bits of the old Labour Party can stay together. I mean, it's a divided party. And, it'll be very interesting to watch over the next few months, because I think they're going to carry on ripping themselves apart.
Yes, and we just have to sit back and enjoy it.
Pass the popcorn.
Lastly, then, once we're back up and running, or even now, how can people get involved in your campaign?
Yeah, I'm taking a little sort of sojourn from it at the moment, obviously, because everyone's focused on the coronavirus thing again. But I mean, I will be starting up, up and running again, definitely in September. It's going to be the summer, July, August, so nothing much happens then. But I've got my website, I've got policies on there. There's been a lot of people who have offered to help, which has been fantastic. So I've got some people in some boroughs, like your good self, in Croydon, who are, helping me, and people are getting signatures for the nominations and so on. One of the biggest things I have to do is to find 330 nominators, and that's a massive task, particularly as an independent candidate. I mean, it's much easier if you're in a big party like the Conservatives or Labour. You can get that no problem. But I need to get 10 nominators from every borough. So if you're watching this and you'd like to nominate me, let me know, and I can send you a copy of the form. You can sign it and send it back to me, and get your friends to sign it in your borough and send it back to me. That would be fantastic. And you can look me up on davidkurten.net as my website. There's a sort of form you can fill in, and that sends an email to me. So if you want to get in touch, please do that, davidkurten.net, and you can contact me if you're able to help in any way. Obviously I'm raising funds, and I'll also be doing some action days going on into October, November and onwards. So there'll be lots of things I'll be doing from September, much more when things get back to normal.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, David, for your time there. Obviously, we'll put up some details to contact David as well. If anyone's interested in getting involved, speak direct to David. And if you've got any thoughts on this, please do get in touch. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Well, thanks again to David for spending the time with us to record that interview. Really good to hear from him. David's a really interesting chap, had a good background and done a variety of things, and pushes an agenda that's different, frankly, from pretty much anyone else in the GLA. So that's great to see. And beyond anything else, he's absolutely a happy warrior. He's someone that really does enjoy his politics.
Undoubtedly, yeah. It's certainly refreshing to hear from somebody prepared to put an alternative point of view to the one you'll get from most politicians, certainly in London. Mike, we need to keep busy during this lockdown. What have we got on our website at the moment?
Well, of course, our listeners will be incredibly pleased to know that we've been working hard for you to make sure you've got plenty of things to keep your mind occupied. We've got the TPA Rich List article that I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of detail on there and a bit of an overview. Well worth having a look at. There's also a link to an interview from Talk Radio and Harry Fon of the Taxpayers Alliance, who many of you will know because we've worked with him a few times. Worth listening in its own right. We've also interviewed Mary Laws from the Foundation Party. Sorry, Councillor Mary Laws. I should get that right. The Foundation Party was a party set up by Mary and Chris Mendes, who many of you will know, and a few others, based predominantly out of Kent, but they do have some candidates and members, indeed a councillor elsewhere. It's an interview on our website. Talks about her ward in Folkestone. Talks about her time in UKIP. The EU referendum, the kind of issues facing the people down there, and what the party stands for. I think it's a party a lot of us would have a lot of sympathies with, and we're prepared to promote all sort of pro-Brexit, non-woke parties. So have a read of that. Well worth having a look, and something interesting there. And we mentioned the virtual drinks we've had this week. Well, on Thursday the 30th of April, we're planning some more virtual drinks at 7:30 p.m. That's Thursday the 30th of April. Details will be on our website. Get in touch if you can't find them, you've got any problems, and hopefully we'll see you there then.
Yeah, really looking forward to it. And as for the website, if anybody would like to write any articles for the website, or if you'd you've got any stories that you'd like us to cover, please do get in contact with us. You can contact us via Twitter at Croydon Const, via our Facebook page, via our website, which is croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or via email at croydonconstitutionalists@gmail.com. So what have we got coming up? Well, obviously with the COVID crisis, we're not able to organise too many events. But as Mike, you just mentioned, we've got the next online meetup for our virtual drinks on Thursday, the 30th of April from 7:30 p.m. But do get in touch if you'd like to join us for that, or as I say, if you've got anything you'd like us to write about. I'd like to thank everybody for listening to the podcast. Do share it with family, friends, relatives, acquaintances, so we can get our message out there and give people something to do during this current lockdown. But until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Till next time, do stay safe.